Well, hello there.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. It's Saturday, 11 a.m. It's time to wake up.
And smell the rosin.
And don't forget that today is Halloween.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween. And what are you going to be for Halloween?
Oh, I wasn't really going to be anything. Oh, yeah, I'm going to be a wedding gig in a quartet.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We are. Yeah,
we have a social distance wedding gig tonight, so
now
I'll be a quartet cellist.
That is a little scary, to be honest. You're right. I forgot about that because I haven't done any real playing yet. So this will be the first one for me. And I'm doing it because I haven't done weddings in a very long time, but because I get to do it with SD, I thought, why not? So yeah, but I do have another character for my Halloween. I'm the queen. This is my inner costume, if you can say. So I'm gonna feel like the queen, treat myself like the queen today. A queen or the queen? How do you say?
One.
Yeah, okay. This is still for me in English the problem with A's and thes. I don't know if I'll ever figure out which article to use when, but so today we have a very interesting topic. So it's all about memorization, and I would like to share with you as a not just as a performer but also as a teacher for quite a while, and including the university level teaching, why I think that memorization indeed is a very important tool for teaching and also for just bettering yourself as a musician, and why I still do require memorization from my students. And also, of course, we're going to share some of our experiences, right, on memorization and tips and tricks.
Yep.
As do you have some really awesome tips about multi-layered memorization?
And we'll talk about that today. So yeah, just like different layers of memorization, and that's something that helps me a lot when I'm memorizing. So,
and the most important thing, make sure and stay tuned to hear one of the most important tips that I've learned at the end of this live stream. Yes. And this is something that it was almost by accident that I've learned, and it showed to me how a lot of my students were actually, by doing this one thing, were undermining all of their efforts, all of the energies that they put into memorization of their pieces were completely undermined by them doing this one thing during their practice. So if you want to know what that was, make sure and stay tuned till the end of this live stream.
yes.
And right now we decided what scale should we pick for today?
Well, I think we're going to do A flat major because it's kind of scary and it's Halloween.
Yeah, so we thought, why not, right?
Yeah. Also, before we start with the scale, which we're switching it up a little bit, we're going to start with the scale and then talk more about memorization. So normally we talk first and then do the scale, but we're switching it up today because it's Halloween. That's just going to be my reasoning for everything. Because Halloween. We also have a new Instagram account.
Yes.
At Seitz Pros, just like our channel name, no spaces, no caps, just at Seitz Pros on Instagram. Please follow us for updates, to stay updated with what we're doing, and for fun content that you won't find on YouTube. So follow us there, and we'd really appreciate it. And you can also message us there about the Wake Up and Smell the Rosin streams. If you have any topics you would like us to go over,
yes,
or questions, now since we have that account, we can direct all our messages to that account. So anytime you want to contact us, just send us a message at our Seitz Pros Instagram.
Yeah, and of course, your comments are always welcome. You're always welcome to comment. We read all of the comments as soon as we can. Any suggestions are very well appreciated, and we definitely always look forward to incorporating your suggestions and demanding like subjects on violin playing as much as we can into our channel content. All right.
So do you want to start?
Yeah,
Scales?
let's do it. Let's start. Oh boy, A flat major.
Fun.
I think I'm gonna sit today too.
Oh wow.
I'm thinking, why not?
Joining the cello club.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Why do I have to always stand? Just because I'm a violinist. Just because I get to always play the melody, the most interesting voices in the orchestra.
Huh?
No, I'm joking. I'm really not like that, but what can I do?
Okay.
Okay.
Can I have your A?
Yes.
Quick tip for tuning, if you are new to ensemble playing or new to string playing, if you have questions about tuning, always play softly, not, I don't mean softly like piano, but a nice mezzo forte sound, and don't overwhelm the actual A that you're getting, because sometimes when we're tuning, it's like, okay, I'm just going to be as loud as possible, like in an orchestra setting, and then you can't hear the A anymore. Mm-hmm. So if you're new to tuning, I like to kind of start up bow and ease it in to kind of blend it with the sound. So that's just a quick tuning tip if you are new to the instrument. Maybe sometime we can do like a little tuning tutorial.
Yeah, you know what's weird? Now that you mentioned, I've noticed I always start up bow.
Yeah. I feel like
weird.
It's because you can kind of like blend the sound in a little bit more.
Yeah, one thing, like now that we're talking about tuning, one thing that the weirdest thing that I've realized about myself, and that's not just about tuning open strings, but just tuning to anyone when you play with them. My original tendency always is, I want to make sure I hear my note very well so that I can compare it to that other person who is playing and make sure that I am in tune with them, right? Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Well, what I realized that actually when I reversed that deliberately and I decided instead paying the most attention to that person's note that I want to tune to, and then being much softer myself. Mm-hmm. It's weird because it's almost like magic. Your fingers start and your ears start tuning into that person much better, which is like, at first it didn't make sense to me, but I guess it probably does. So anyway, when you're tuning, so what I've learned from this is that when you're tuning, it's more important to hear the source of, or that note to which you're tuning. That should be on the forefront, and then your own note should be actually under it. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, that actually allows you to hear yourself and how you are corresponding with that other note much better, which is kind of interesting, but that's what I'm learning. You learn tuning all your life. You never stop learning how to tune, whether tune to your colleagues, because as string players, that's the nature of the beast, right? We usually play with someone. We very rarely would play by ourselves. So this is kind of, the more I think about tuning and being more in tune with others, the more I realize I kind of have to be actually a little softer, and that other voice should be much louder, and that helps me to tune much better. So anyway, all right. So let's see how our A flat major is doing. So are we? Let's do 3 octaves. Now A flat major on the violin actually can be played in 4 octaves, but I don't really feel like playing 4 octaves. It's Halloween. I'm lazy. I'm treating myself like the queen or a queen, whatever, whichever is better.
One. You can use either one.
Why? Why is that? Like, can you explain?
Honestly, I don't know.
You see, that's why.
It's just like growing up speaking English. I guess I'm sure there's a grammar rule that maybe I learned way back when in elementary school, but like A is more general and the is more specific. And then, like, treating yourself like a queen, like you could treat yourself like a queen. But so I guess, and if you said I'm treating myself like the queen, I'd ask which queen are you treating yourself as?
Okay. Well, now it does make sense.
So like if you said a queen, I'd say okay, a queen. But if you said I'm treating myself like the queen, okay, which queen? Like Queen Elizabeth, Queen who? You know what I mean?
Okay, maybe I'll stick with a queen. I like that better.
Yeah,
Queen Esther.
That's just how I kind of think about
it's a wrong holiday.
Yeah, poor wrong holiday. But I don't know. I guess if anybody knows, if any of you are like grammar junkies, And I wish I had a more eloquent explanation, but you put me on the the spot, so
Okay, that's good. You know, that's the funnest part of being live. You know, you can put yourself or others on the spot without them realizing it, and then see them squirm. But you did very good, by the way. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, 3 octave, and yeah, you start. So we're gonna do the thirds as usually. Oh, guys. So here's an A, just in case if you didn't have a chance, if you just tuned in. Yeah, always tune in to 440. That's American Standard A. That's what I'm tuning to now. And yeah, so Esther's going to start first. I'll join you in 2 notes. And this way we'll play in thirds, which is much more fun.
2 notes per bow. Ready? Go.
I can't believe I did this, but I actually vibrated on the scale, which is a big no-no. But again, this is Halloween. We can do whatever we want.
But also, like, if you want to practice your vibrato, you can with a scale. That's a great way to practice. So, like, if you're practicing a scale for intonation, it's better not to vibrate. But, I mean, at this point, you know, like, you obviously know the A-flat major scale really well. So I think it's fine.
Yeah, and
speaking of scales, actually, on my other channel, with the Bowery Trio, I just put out a video about practicing scales, and I can link it in the description. But that is a quick overview for cellists and also really any string player about practicing scales and how to do that if you feel lost on how to practice scales. And if you're interested in some tips about that, that you want us to go over on Wake Up and Smell the Rosin, let us know. And let me make sure that I don't have any.
Maybe you can bring the phone here in case if we have any requests.
Josiah said Happy Halloween, and
thank you.
Lydia said Dobre utra.
Dobre utra. Dobre utra. Thank you. So guys, actually I wanted to do something fun, and we haven't talked about this. I just had this idea. How about if we play, so right now, I think when I started playing with vibrato, it made the scale kind of sad a little bit, don't you agree? So I wonder, since it's Halloween, what if we play a scale in a different character? Okay. So what if we can we play the same scale but make it sound super angry? Okay. Are you ready? So, let's do it. Again, 2 per bow. Start? Yeah, you start. Okay. Sometimes to practice scale,
you can practice different characters.
Yeah, different characters and
colors.
Different strokes. Like, do you want to try a martelé stroke?
Sure.
Can we just do
I
martelé?
didn't like martelé.
Yeah, I don't like, but it's Halloween, so we're trying to do ugly things. I think martelé is the ugliest stroke ever. Let's do the ugly scale, and we'll do martelé stroke.
Okay, you start this
Okay,
time.
so.
Wait.
Ready? Go. Ugly, that's why I don't like it, but it's a great exercise. Okay, so I think that was fun. Any more tips on A flat major?
Well, I mean, just the fingering, but you know, it's a lot of extensions, not really any open strings. So really, just being keeping track of what position your hand is going to be in, because you don't have those open strings, and that means you don't have them for reference. So when you get into these keys where you don't have a lot of open strings or virtually no open strings, you should definitely practice those with a drone to get used to hearing that, because with other scales, when you have an open A or an open D or an open G or something, it kind of anchors you a little bit. So if you're playing through the scale and you hear the open string and you realize it's out of tune, you know you can't argue with that. If you tuned, of course. Mm-hmm. If you didn't tune, then you can argue with it. But if you're in tune and you hear an open string that's out of tune, then you know that there's something that you're doing that needs to change. But with scales like this, one of the things I've noticed in myself and in my students is that it's easier to get lost because we don't have those anchors that are just built in the scale for us. So for these kinds of scales where you don't have open strings to rely on, it's really important to practice them with drones, especially when you're starting out. But even for, you know, seasoned professionals, you know, if you're practicing keys with lots of sharps or flats, it's really useful to have a drone so you can hear, you know, how the pitches relate to each other and how they relate to the tonic and the fifth scale degree. So
yeah, awesome. You know, I totally agree with your tips. I think one of the things that I've noticed, that when you think of accidentals, it's very important to think in the context of tonality. For example, I've noticed that my students, when they're trying to play A flat, if they're thinking, oh, A flat is just half a step below A natural, that A flat tends to be way sharper than it should be. So when you're in the context of if you're in the context of A flat major, then when it comes to A flat, you should think, oh, it's right above the G natural, or so in terms of G natural is your leading tone. So you want to make sure that you're kind of referring with your A flat. If you're building off of something, you're not building down from an A natural, you're building up from G natural. The same with, for example, D flat in A flat major. Again, you don't want to think D flat is just half a step below D natural. In the context of A flat major, it's not going to give you that right, just D flat that you want to hear, your ear wants to hear. Again, you want to think it's right above C. So in the A flat major, if you're playing a chord, for example, a dominant chord, then the C, the third of the the tonic chord in A flat major is C. A flat, C, E flat. So C is the third of the tonic chord. So in a way, if you're moving that into your fourth subdominant chord, then the C will go into D flat, and that's, so you want those natural built-in, you know, half step relationships to really play off of those when you're thinking, so how low is my D flat, or how do I play that D flat correctly in the context of the scale? You really want to refer to the note that it's going to go down into rather than up to its natural. So if you do that, then you'll be totally fine. All right, so
we got some more good mornings from Adriana and from
Thank
Carissa.
you, Adriana. Thank you, Carissa. Thank you, guys. So nice to see that you're
I brought
here.
the pumpkin pillow over.
Yeah, I got it. I really like it.
It's so nice, and it has like orange corduroy on the back. It's really cute.
Very, very comfy. It's almost cold here, actually.
It kind of is. Yeah, it's like, it's cool.
All right, so shall we talk about memorization?
Yeah, sure.
All right. This is a very exciting, interesting topic for me because
Do you want to move up there with your iPad?
We could. Yeah, so I can, you're right. So I can
you
see
need
my
your
notes. Yeah, I need my notes. And this is something that actually I never thought of until I started teaching in the US. Especially until I started teaching in academia. So since I was, a child, I received my music education back in former Soviet Union, which is now, many different countries. Back then it was one. And so I was very fortunate to not only have amazing teachers, but also to be studying in this very holistic, that I like to call it, system of music education, where we basically started not just with our instrument, but also with everything else, such as solfege, your harmony, your theory, your choir. So it was a very kind of immersive experience. And so every part of music that's important kind of became a part of your life right away. So it was a very organic way of studying music, and I think it's the best one. But it's very difficult. It's tricky to make it available anywhere. Of course, in the former Soviet Union, it was possible because the government subsidized everything. But if you try to do it in the US, I know there are some schools that do that, but they're usually extremely cost prohibiting to most of the children. So anyone who has an opportunity to have that kind of education is very, very fortunate. And so because of this, I believe we were actually expected to perform everything from memory. And since I was 7, I performed 3 or 4 pieces in the recitals that were in front of the audience. That's every fourth of the year, every quarter. So that's like every semester, it would be 6 or 7 performances, and that's in front of the live audience, always memorized, always solo or with the piano accompaniment, not in an ensemble until I was much later, at the end of high school. And so with that, I didn't even pay attention to how I was memorizing, because it's just something we did. And so therefore, of course, when I came into the US and I started teaching here, that was a problem for me when my students started asking me, well, how do you memorize? And so Esti, what was your experience with memorization?
I remember it didn't used to, bother me much, because I would just, when I practiced things enough, when I was younger, I would just automatically memorize them. And it wasn't until I had my first little memory slip in a performance that it started being a point of anxiety for me. And it actually, especially later, when I went to, conservatory and grad school, one of the things that was most nerve-wracking for me was memorization when I was playing. And I think one of the things that helped me overcome that was just trying to memorize in as many layers and as deeply as possible that I could. And it's funny because it really is a psychological thing, and I think it's a matter of not trusting yourself. You question, and that's a trait that I think a lot of people have. I know I deal with, even sometimes in regular life, struggling to trusting myself and the decisions I make for myself, and not questioning them. And I feel like sometimes in music, that's how it comes through for me, is with memorization. It's not trusting myself to know that I know the notes. And I think for a lot of people, it's not a point of concern until they have some sort of experience with it.
On stage,
which is what happened to me. As a kid, I never thought about it. I just memorized it. But I honestly don't remember. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember. Oh, I remember when I played that Allegro Appassionato, I was really nervous about it. That was the first time I was nervous about forgetting something. And then I didn't use enough bow, and my mom got really mad at me. But yeah, that was fun. I was
sorry.
I
hope I didn't scar you for life.
It's fine.
But that's a thing with me. The bow is a big thing with me.
But yeah, so I think there's probably, I'm trying to think if there was a specific turning point, but I think it's just the older you get, the more self-aware you become, and the more aware you become of others and that other people are judging you. And then, you know, like experiencing those little brain farts or like slips, even in practicing. And then
That's
you're
a
like,
good Halloween term.
yeah, and then
I
you're
like
like,
that.
wait. Like, I remember, like, you'd be practicing something and you forget. And you're like, wait, I know this. Why did I just forget it? And then you get anxious. You're like, what if that happens while I'm performing?
Yeah.
And normally, that kind of stuff happens in the practice room because you're not as engaged and you're not as focused. But,
Well, actually,
you know.
I've learned a lot about that phenomenon that you're talking about. That's actually a good thing. And remind me to make sure and explain why it is a good thing. And I know just the tip about how to deal with that. But that, if you notice, that usually happens much later when you know the piece pretty well, right? So that's a great thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. So I definitely want to explain that.
You can explain it now.
Yeah. Okay.
Just go ahead?
So first, so why does that happen? You know, and that's kind of, I'm just gonna go with it. So this was kind of on tip 3 on my list, but this is actually a good thing. If you've noticed, when you're playing a piece at the beginning, you know, your brain has to work much harder because it's, you know, it's focusing on every note. It's not seeing the bigger picture yet. And so you don't really remember the piece in continuity. But then what happens, sometimes you get, once you know the piece much better, usually the reason you all of a sudden you like get stumped in a place, or you all of a sudden you find yourself in a different part of the piece because you got confused, that's actually a good sign, because that is because now your brain by now is seeing a bigger picture. And so there are always these little parts of the pieces that are very similar. It could be not maybe in melody, just the pattern in the fingering. It could be the pattern in the bowing. It could be a very similar part, like motive, that in one piece, in one part of the piece takes you to one place, and in another part of the piece takes you to the other place. And but the scary thing about this, it doesn't happen to you for a long time, because at first, when you don't know the piece, your brain doesn't see that whole picture, so it doesn't even make any correlation. So number one, that is the scariest part, because if you didn't practice that piece long enough, if you didn't internalize it long enough, then that part, when your brain finally makes that correlation, could happen on stage. And that's what's scary. So therefore, that brings me to my first point, which I completely misspelled the word tortoise. I was trying to say, be the tortoise. And Esther was like reading through my notes. She said, what did I write actually?
Tortuous.
Tortuous, which means like torture, which is exactly the same for me. You know, slow and steady. It is not a tortoise. It's tortuous for me. So it was kind of a prophetic misspell, I would say. But so number one, when you have a piece that you're learning and you know eventually you will have to perform it from memory, the most natural way to memorize it, make sure that you practice it every day, and at least 15-20 minutes a day. Make sure you are, you know, giving that piece some time, and not just mindlessly like fingering through it, but really picking a spot, really diving into it, really, you know, dissecting the challenges here. I also noticed one thing: the simpler the pieces, the harder it is for me to play it from memory, because it doesn't take any concentration for me to play through it. So it's like I played it and it's completely like I don't remember what I just played. Kind of like very simple orchestra things. But when the piece is challenging and I'm devoting my attention and I'm focusing on perfecting technical things, even just technical things in it, guess what? Just because I'm so focused, all of a sudden my body starts remembering it. And so I think that is this is why I actually have a requirement of, in my studio, when we play scales and arpeggios, the first time that's the first thing I tell all of my incoming freshmen. And if you guys are here, I mean, give it thumbs up. I think some of my students should be here. But anyway, I tell them, okay, the first time we study a scale and going over it, a certain scale, we're going to use music and my scale packet, and we're going to go over it. I'll explain everything to you. But after that first time, I expect you to play these scales and arpeggios from memory. My reasoning behind it is that my goal is for my students and for myself at least to devote 20 minutes a day to playing that particular scale as they're learning it, or and arpeggios. And so my reasoning is, scale is a very limited amount of information. They're all very similar. So if you're after a week of practicing, if you can't play that one 3-octave scale from memory and those 5 arpeggios, that means most likely you are not spending enough time practicing that scale, or maybe you're not present when you're doing it. Maybe you're doing it mindlessly. So that's the most effective way, is the natural way that your body, your brain, your body, your muscles memorize material. And that is just, and I think both of us are more or less natural memorizers, right? It's kind of like happens naturally.
Yeah, and I think, I took a class at Manhattan School of Music about performance techniques, and we talked a lot about memorization because that was a pretty common anxiety among the class. And, especially in like Bach or pieces like that where there are a lot of similar motives that are easy to confuse with one another. And the biggest thing she said was, about memorization was kind of what you're saying. Like, you can't, some people say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to memorize half this piece. You can't really force memorization. If you're trying to force it like that, it's not going as deep as it should. It's surface level, because you have two types of memory. You have this surface level memory and you have deep memory. And if you're just memorizing something like, okay, I have to memorize these notes, and you're like,
which
okay,
sometimes
I got
you
it.
have to do,
Right,
sometimes, but hopefully rarely.
Right, but hopefully, that's not, because that's not as stable and as reliable, and that's going to create a lot more anxiety when you perform, because you're going to be worried that you're going to forget. But when you have this deep memorization, it comes from repetitive practice and mindful practice and focused practice. So if you're practicing mindfully, your body, can't help but remember, kind of like, you remember how to brush your teeth every day because you've done it every day. Hopefully brush your teeth. But like, you've done it for so many years, so many days, so many hours. And that's kind of like what we're doing too, like getting those habits and memories, really deep inside of ourselves. And like, speaking of the mental thing, like I think the most helpful thing for me with memorization has been mental practice. So being able to sit down and visualize myself going through the piece, knowing every fingering, every bowing, and that's where I find those places, because I'll be going along and then all of a sudden there's like a blank spot and I realize I don't know that place so well. I go on autopilot in that place. I need to practice it so that I can do it in my head. And then, and you can even practice performing in that way. Like, you imagine what it's like to walk on stage, to sit down, to start. And like, that has been one of the most helpful processes for me in memorization.
That's
for
great.
Sure. So mentally is really important.
So yeah, I think slow and steady, you can't beat that. This is something that will really create that natural memorization, which does give you the most comfort and the most confidence. It's kind of like, like if you're a gardener, you go to a nursery and you want to plant a tomato, right? You have so many different types of tomatoes. It's kind of like, I feel like that's how we are. Our brains work very, very differently, and there's so many techniques to make us work faster. But guess what? All those types of tomatoes, they all take a certain amount of time to ripen. Like, you won't find a tomato that will just ripen in one day. There's just, and I feel like tricks and tips are great, and they do help us, teachers and, people who have experience help, this, like that whole experience of all of musicians doing things definitely help us be more effective. But you can't get around time. I mean, there's time and concentration. And that's why, I really, by the way, if you're an educator or if you're a student and you have an opinion concerning whether memorization is still a valid thing, a valid, like, demand on your student, if it should be completely abandoned, and if it doesn't make sense anymore, please comment. I would love to hear from you. As a pedagogue, that's my, I did doubt this whole memorization thing, like I said, when I started teaching in the US, because I've seen that it causing a lot of struggle. And I thought, well, why? Because I don't want my students just to spend all their time just trying to memorize something. I'd rather them work on the quality of their performance. And so there is a certain balance that you can achieve, and every student is different. But what I found that actually one of the most important things that could prevent you from memorizing is that maybe you haven't learned how to hear yourself and the melody that you're actually creating as you're playing. Violin, both stringed instruments are so labor intensive. They're so complex. And a lot of my students come to me from mostly orchestral or mariachi background where they played a lot, but they're mostly in a group. And they've learned mostly in a group setting. Now, the group setting is great because it helps you not to feel so self-conscious, and it may be in some sense it's very liberating when you're learning in a group, because not everyone can hear your every mistake, and so you're a little bit less anxious. But the problem with only group learning an instrument like violin or cello, you need to develop a very good sense of how you sound in order to progress, and you need to learn how to hear what you're doing again, because otherwise it's very easy to just feel the mechanics and that's it. And so what I've noticed that having the music in front of your eyes creates this hypnotic kind of connection, eyes and fingers and movements, and then it completely bypasses the ear. And so what I felt like, and I started thinking, well, how can I get my students to really put them in the position where they would absolutely need to hear themselves? And what I realized, memorization is a great tool for that, because not only the only way you can memorize something is if you're perceiving the melody you're actually creating while you are playing, because that's a very important, that's actually the final product of what we are doing. But also you have to hear a little bit ahead of what's going inside in your inner hearing. So that's why for me memorization is a very valid tool still in teaching, and especially when it comes to certain genres of performance. And so that was very helpful. I know, Esther, you teach. Have you had students that needed memorization, or have you just in teaching, have you encountered any kind of?
Honestly, I've had some, but some of the students that I've had that, had to memorize things were kind of seemed to just like do it a little bit. I haven't had a student yet where it's been a problem, because a lot of my students are either beginners or kind of intermediate, but like at the high school level where they're not necessarily required to memorize. So I haven't thought a lot about, I haven't required my students to memorize yet, really, but there are definitely instances where I could see that it would be beneficial and helpful. And I mean, for myself, like, I feel like I know something better once I have it memorized, or if I've practiced something enough, I notice that I've already memorized it without trying. But I think for me, something that I was taught and that I, do teach and will teach, the more I teach and, come across teaching memorization is, that you need to memorize in layers, and that's what makes you feel more confident. So having, a few different layers of memorization, and then that makes you feel like your memorization is really foolproof and gives you more confidence on stage. So, for instance, you should be able to mentally run through it. That's like one step. You should be able to sing it through all the way. And then even if you're, if you're tone deaf, or if you feel like you can't sing, it doesn't have to be like a performance ready singing. It just needs to be that you can hum through it, or you can hear the whole part in your head, the whole piece from the beginning to end, and you know exactly what's coming. And then another one that is really, of course, playing, that's one layer, but another layer that's really intensive but helpful is being able to write it out on blank sheet music paper. And that is, that's hard but it can be really revealing. And actually, like, I've done it before for certain things, for certain movements of like Bach, and that honestly was really helpful. And I was like, wow, okay, I feel really confident. Like, I know this well enough that I can literally write it onto this paper from memory. And it made me feel much better just knowing that I could do it, even though I wasn't necessarily going to like use that in performance, but knowing that I was able to do that without having a problem, and just knowing how it looks on the page, because I'm a very visual person.
Me
So
too.
being able to see that page is really important. So yeah, for me and like for my students, memorizing in layers I think is really important, because not only does it ensure that you have it memorized, but it also ensures that you'll feel confident.
You know that word ensure that you have it memorized. I remembered the mean tricks my teachers back in Russia played on me all the time. So when I would play a piece, they would say, okay, start from there. And they would see if I could start. So they would just like hum, okay, no, I don't want it from the beginning. I want you to start from, and they would hum from that part and see how well I could get to that part, like without seeing the music. And that is like the ultimate test too, how well you know the piece. If you can make your way through the piece from any spot, that means you totally got it. And then of course, an important thing is seeing the whole picture, you know, being able to see the whole picture in your mind's view. That's very important.
Isaiah asked if we have any tips on how to stay focused when practicing.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And I had this, again, memorization really keeps you focused, because if you're practicing from memory, you are able to look at your bow arm, you're able to look at other things than just being hypnotized by music. And that actually, I'm so glad you asked, because that was my second point, is one of the reasons I require memorization from my students is because when you're practicing violin, especially the bow, I always tell them, the left hand has this feeling of touch. So you don't really need to use your eyes. You have the feeling of touch that keeps you aware of where you are on the violin. Now, the problem with the bow is just a stick that is not connected to your nerves in any way except for your fingers. But when you are actually creating the vibrations of the string by, moving the bow across the string, you have no way of actually feeling that particular thing as it is happening. And so therefore, your eyes are so helpful when you're having any kind of problems with string crossings, with maybe weird sounds that your bow is starting to make. A lot of times, by just looking either on your bow or in the mirror, you could see the most obvious and very simple reason for that your bow might be just in the wrong part as far as the bow placement. And that immediately, first of all, it improves your focus because you can use your eyes to actually focus on how you're producing the sound. Second, it motivates you because you can see that your bow all of a sudden is on the bridge. And of course, that's why it sounds so horrible. And then in that 1 second, boom, all you have to do, you improve that, you figured that out. You do not have to practice and play that 10 hours to beat your head against the wall to figure out why does it sound so bad. And it happens all the time. And so now I feel definitely memorization. And so my second trick, as you're practicing first you're starting to learn the music, right? The piece of music, and you're practicing. Of course, you're looking at the music. Think of those little check-ins with your bow, with your technique. Maybe stand in front of the mirror and give yourself, like after maybe a week of playing this piece, give yourself a kind of an encouragement to every so often take your eyes off the music, even for a couple of seconds, and check your bow, check your stance in the mirror, or just like this. As you're doing that inadvertently, it's a very sneaky way of introducing playing from memory to your brain and getting you more comfortable with that before you start playing huge sections. Because that little moment when you are checking your bow, and you're probably already doing it, you realize you're already playing from memory at that point. And so those are one of the best ways to keep yourself concentrated, is not being hypnotized by the little black dots on the white paper, but because they are very hypnotizing, and the weird part, like, for me, it was completely opposite. Like I said, a lot of my students would tell me, I'm so terrified of playing from memory in public. For me, it was the opposite. When I started performing later in life, when I started performing a lot of chamber repertoire that requires to play with music, I hated that. And I still don't enjoy it as much because I can literally feel how much focus the music takes away. Even though most of the time the music I play, I already almost memorized it because I practice that chamber part, and a lot of parts that are difficult in the chamber music, I actually memorize it on purpose. But still, just having that page there, there's something about it. It just draws your attention. And so, yes, anything you can do to take your eyes off of music and pay attention to your bow, it does magic to the focusing on what you're actually doing.
Yeah, and I think just, like having those things that you're aware of and that you're focusing on will give you the focus that you need, because a lot of times lack of focus in the practice room comes from lack of having any goals, and it comes from just feeling like you're just playing or going through the motions and you don't really know what you're aiming for. So having a goal before you go into the practice room and an allotted amount of time, and that kind of ties into one of our next or later points, but having those goals and that time set to do a specific task, just like anything else. Like if you were like, okay, I have math class tomorrow and I need to do my math homework, it's probably going to take like an hour, so I'm going to set aside this hour to do my math homework. And in that math class you're probably working on, like, let's say you're working on multiplication or long division, and okay, so for this hour I'm going to be working on multiplication and long division. It's like that with practicing too. So if you say like, okay, for 30 minutes I'm going to practice my scales and I'm going to focus on my bow
placement.
Yeah, like I'm going to focus on bow placement, or I'm going to focus on sound, or I'm going to focus on vibrato. Or when you have a piece you're working on, say, okay, today I'm going to just work on this section right here, and that's all I'm going to work on, and I'm going to work on sound production, I'm going to work on intonation, and pick one thing at a time to work on, because when we try to do like so many things, that can be overwhelming. So pick one thing and say like, okay, I'm working on intonation, and maybe, if my sound quality, if there's things I want to change, I'll worry about that later. And if my sound quality is not so great right now, it's okay, because I'm mostly focusing on like fingerings. That's very wise. Yeah. So those are just some tips that tie in, but memorizing and practicing memorization is a really good focus tip.
Yes, because you absolutely cannot do that without focusing. And so the next thing that really gets a lot of people in memorization is like, you remember the beginning so well, and then toward the end it gets worse and worse. And obviously that's because we tend to start at the beginning. We tend to if you always start at the beginning of the
chords
keys,
of the Elgar cello concerto, everybody knows it, and then they're like, okay,
that's it. So much later in life, I was researching this very prominent Russian pedagogue, Konstantin Mostras, who taught Ivan Galamian. And in one of his books, I read this really awesome tip that never occurred to me, because, we know that it's good to break things up. Like I always break an etude. Like if I have a complicated piece or an etude, I would break it up in so many parts. And I would say, today I'm practicing part 1, then when I feel good about it, I'm going to, whatever, as long as it takes me, I'm going to make that part really great. Then I go to the next one. And so what happens, like, for example, I had the plan, right? Today, like Monday is part 1, Tuesday part 2, like Wednesday part 3. And then maybe on Monday, I wasn't very focused in my practice, and I didn't really, I wasn't satisfied with how far I've gone with the part 2, so I said part 1. So I thought, well, it's okay. Then tomorrow, instead of practicing part 2, I'm just going to keep working on part 1. And so the tip that I found out from that book of Mostras said, never do that. So, and it seems counterintuitive, because I think, well, I practice so well, I'm so detailed in my practice, I'm going to stay here until but actually it backfires. And so his tip was great, because what he said, once you divide, your whatever you're studying into parts, and make sure that whatever amount you gave to part 1, you use it, you focus, you practice it as hard as you can, you do whatever. But whether you accomplished what you wanted or not, you cannot come back to that, because now next day, if it's time to practice part 2, then you have to abandon part 1 completely, regardless of whether you felt you did good or not. And then now you can only practice part 2. And then the same with the next part. And so what I've realized, what that does, first of all, when I practice part 1, I know, okay, I really need to accomplish this. So I'm much, because I'm not going to be able to come back to it tomorrow. So if I have a goal, I need to do my best to accomplish it today. And so that really keeps me much more focused, because I don't think, oh, I have all the time in the world. I have the whole summer. The summer is just starting. So no, I know that if you didn't accomplish it, it's fine. It's not a tragedy, because guess what? If you have 3 parts, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you can come back to that part 1 and you can make sure keep notes and everything. But what it does, it's amazing, because by rotating like that through different parts and really keeping yourself accountable in that way, you end up actually practicing the piece very evenly. And so you don't get that weird feeling where it's completely like black forest, when you get to certain parts of the piece. Another thing also, if you realize musical form is usually cyclic or cyclic, what's the right word? So you will get, once you get to the end, sometimes you realize, oh, it's almost exactly the same thing. So it's even more encouraging, because if you practice really well part 1, part 2, by the time you get to part 3, usually it's a recap or something like that, where you realize you're building on what you already learned in part 1. And so that helps you see the progress, that helps you really appreciate how well you're doing. And that's a very important part about staying focused in your practice. A lot of times the reason we lose focus, because we lose motivation, and we lose motivation if we practice ineffectively. It's very easy to lose motivation. So because of that rotation method, I really highly recommend it to all my students. And I really used it a lot in very like stressful situations. When I did have some situations where I had to force memorize things, and so using that method really helped me.
Yeah. We have another question. Yeah. Any tips on how to get a good tone and sound?
Okay.
So I mean, when you're practicing your memorization, as we were talking about, you're also paying attention to your technique and the things you're doing with the bow. So that ties into sound production. For cellists, really for us, a lot of the focus is putting our weight into the string and using gravity to our advantage. So, and I know that doesn't quite, I think that applies to violinists at some degree, because you still are putting weight into the string.
Oh yeah, we still use weight. And actually, it's just weird, because we can't really support it that much naturally, and violin is very small, so of course weight is what we use.
So just and that's just like a quick general overview. We can definitely talk about tone and sound maybe
next live. Let's
live
do that. That's a
just
great,
like a whole big topic on it. But for now, I guess I would say the big thing is making sure that you have an even distribution from your weight coming this way and your speed going this way.
It's the balance, basically. That's all it comes to.
And the analogy I use with my students is like, we make a piece of toast, and then you put jam on it or butter, whatever you choose. If you just plop it all in the middle and
cute.
Don't spread it out, it's not going to be any good. So what you need to really do, if you have a bunch of weight and you don't move your bow, it's just going to sound bad. But if you spread the jelly or the butter all over the toast and you have a nice even layer, it tastes great. And if you do that with your weight on your bow and spread the weight that you're putting in this way, it sounds much better.
I just love that. Maybe that should be my Halloween costume. The toast with jam and bread. Or no, was it butter, jam and bread, whatever. Wasn't that a kitty book, Jam and Bread? Francis?
Oh, yeah. Bread and Jam for Francis.
Yeah, something like that.
That was one of my favorite books.
You guys liked it a lot.
Because it had to do with food, of course. I liked it.
Yeah. That's a great... And actually, this is a great question, and it ties into our topic of memorization. When you're thinking of sound production, especially when it's in the particular etude or piece or scale, you can imagine when your brain, the capacity of your brain is busy with looking at the music and listening. But if you take the music out of the equation, now you're all about ears, all about listening. And I have to tell you, the art of sound production, of course, technique is very important, but the number one thing that improves your sound production is how well you improve your hearing. That's it. It's all about your ears. Number one, because before you even understand what to change in your sound production, you have to understand what is it that you like or you don't like about your sound, And what is it? What is the sound that you want? And the only way you can know that is your ears. It's kind of like, I always think of Josh. That's Estee's brother. Josh is my middle child, and he's an artist. And I remember when I started taking him to private art lessons, and I asked him, what is it that you feel that you're learning the most? And he said, Mom, you know what? It's all about learning how to see. And that just really stuck with me, because that's what I realized. The more I teach, and the more I teach myself, the more I teach others, I realize when it comes to sound, it's all about your ears. And so again, when you are playing from memory, you have so much more capacity in your brain that can just concentrate on hearing the result that you're getting. It's like I tell my students very often, making music, it's like having a candy factory. Who cares how much you work? Who cares how great your supplies are, the products that you put in candy? Who cares how many specialists you hired and how many millions of dollars you paid them? If your candy doesn't taste good, or if you don't make any candy at the end, no one cares, because that makes no sense. So just remember, again, when you are not busy looking at the music with your eyes, that's when you fully can really embrace your sound, and you can really immerse yourself and really start exploring with your ears and figure out, what is it that I sound like? And with that, of course, the topic that now we're all using this is recording. That is an amazing tool, both for making your sound better and for focusing. I mean, the best, if you want to really practice, play on camera. Video is my I like the best. You can do audio, but video, because you can actually see what you're doing, not just hear. And then take your music, take that piece that you just recorded, or part of it, or scale. Have the pencil or whatever, however you're able to mark in your music. You start watching. The minute you see something you don't like, you pause, you make a note. In music, continue. And so then after that, it will take you probably 10 to 15 minutes. After that, you go straight to the things that you didn't like. You work on them. Don't forget also to pat yourself, for things that you do like. That also is very important. But, you will not believe how productive you'll be in your practice. So a couple of other points that before my very last, very important point. Remember I mentioned at the beginning, something that I discovered that my students were doing that was undermining all of their work on memorization. So that will come very soon. But there's difference to memorizing different genres. Memorizing Bach is extremely difficult. If you are about to perform Bach from memory, beware and don't take it too lightly, because that is probably one of the top things. If there is ever anything that I am scared of forgetting on stage, that's the solo Bach.
So this is where you use those memorization layers in Bach. Also, associating, one of the things I did is I associated different sections with different objects or colors, which you've done that before too. Like,
I'm glad you like that trick.
I did that for one of the movements of Bach that I was played on my recital. That was just, for some reason, it was just really repetitive, and I was having a lot of trouble remembering exactly where I was and what came next. And so I would practice so what I did actually is I made sections, I named them different things, and then I used a random generator, and I generated, so I think for this one I did like numbers. So I generated, said, okay, section 6, and I memorized that section and played it. And then I did the next one, I said, okay, section 2, played it, and memorized each piece.
Cool.
And then made sure that no matter what section it was generated, I was able to recall it and play it. So I knew that I knew each section and each piece, and that I could play them in any order. And then I felt like I actually knew it, and then I was able to play it in order normally. And then I got to the point where I didn't need to recall the numbers, but it's a good way to help if you're having trouble, because it kind of forces you to separate it.
Yes, that's a great way. I think one of the difficulties for us, for string players, the ones what we all have. So I know you have suites, we have sonatas and partitas, but they've been transcribed for cello. For viola, and I've seen even bassists play some of the ours and yours solo Bach. So for string players, one of the, I think, hardest things, the reason it's so difficult to memorize Bach, especially if you're just doing it for the first time and playing your Bach for the first time, is because it doesn't really have a melody, which is number one thing that we easily memorize. And it doesn't, you are not playing with accompaniment per se. It's the accompaniment that kind of helps you spell out the harmonic context sometimes, which sometimes also helps us memorize, is not present. So it's kind of coded into the solo part. So you have this solo part that is not a melody, but also it's not the most obvious harmony, because the harmony from this vertical chords, it's kind of strung out this way mostly. And so you have to, from the beginning, from the get-go, you have to start feeling what harmonies are present there. And if you make correlation, those harmonic correlations, which you could do by just analysis, if you naturally don't hear, or sometimes if you just start paying attention, you will hear that tension. Here's the 5, and it goes in 1, and this time 5 goes into 6, and this time he modulates, and here's a Neapolitan, chord or something. That really can help too. So in Bach, I feel like a lot of times I see with myself, I tend to hear the harmonic context pretty well because, like I said, I studied harmony and theory so in such a connection with violin playing. But even then, there are other things that make it difficult for my fingers, for example. Sometimes my fingers get tied up in Bach very easily, easier than anywhere else. And I realize, because if you think of, of course, for cello it might be different. For violins, most of Bach movements are pretty much in the lower position. It's like first position most of the time. Now,
except the 6th suite. The 6th suite is all over the place, but.
And so what happens, technically speaking, and that's purely mechanical thing, why sometimes things get I suddenly hiccup on stage in the places I feel like my fingers got stuck or tied up or forgot where to go. Or so what happens, what I realize, when you play in the same position for a long period of time, you end up with many more string crossings, and which sometimes can be very uncomfortable, because a lot of times the reason we like to go up to the position because it helps us stay on the same string until it's more comfortable for us to do a string crossing. But also that initiates a lot of lateral movements of our fingers, which we don't really focus on. And so that's when you're memorizing Bach, concentrate on these mechanical things, actual lateral, where your fingers, the same finger has to play notes on the next string very soon, for example, sooner than you expect. So when you're relaxed, when you're practicing, you're in a relaxed state, your body is very easily making those adjustments. But when you are going to be under stress and just a little bit tighter, what happens, it just will underperform just a little bit. And all of a sudden, and it could be both in your bow arm and in your fingers, and then all of a sudden you have that hiccup, and all of a sudden it's like a little bump in the road that you have to stop and figure out where you are, or your fingers suddenly go to end up on a different string where they're not supposed to, and that also can kick it out and just make kind of a disaster on stage, or just like a nuisance where you played so well and then why did I make that hiccup? And so most of the time when I analyze those little hiccups that happen in Bach, happen from the fact that my fingers all of a sudden weren't fast enough changing to another string, or the string crossing didn't happen at the right place just because I was a little bit tight or didn't go far enough. And so because of that, all of a sudden I was completely lost, because now my muscle memory is all messed up. And so memorizing sonata form. So if you are playing a concerto also for the first time, I found many students have a really challenging time memorizing it for that reason that you already mentioned, because sonata form has a recap and it has a development, and those sections use the same motives, but they end up going to a slightly different place. And so in those cases,
being able to sing it, I think, is really helpful in those cases. Like knowing the melody really well and knowing the orchestra part really well, or the piano part, and a lot of times those harmonies will give way to help you remember, oh yeah, it's this next part.
Yeah, that's true. And so one of the things that I do, I play back to back. And that happens, again, those kind of things happen later, when you know the piece well enough where your brain can see the whole picture, that's when it starts making correlation. Oh, this is just like that. And then all of a sudden it takes you to the very end of the movement. Like you started after 3 seconds, you ended your movement. Or what is it like E major prelude from Bach's third? There's that very notorious place where it could send you back in circles, or it could make you end the movement like in half the time, which is like both are scary. But the second one, when you end up in this loop where you keep going back to the beginning, you're like, oh my goodness, I know. So there are actually a lot of concertos that have those little places. And so the best way to do that, first of all, be grateful when that happens, that it doesn't happen on stage. And if it's happening and you still have at least like 3 or 4 weeks before performance, that's perfect, because now what you can do, you can take those 2 parts and I just play them back to back. So I play the first one and go on, like if it happens like in the first page and then something like that on the last page. So I would just start there and then just continue and play it like 10 times in a row. Then I do the other page, take that part, continue, do that separately 10 times in a row. And then I start doing one from here, and just different tempos, different whatever, speed, slow, fast. Slow actually is the best test of whether you remember a piece or not. If you can play through the piece painfully slow tempo and still remember everything. And so that really, and then of course I like assigning colors to different in sonata form, where you have a concerto where, especially third movements, where you have refrain episode. I did that for Cacciatorni. I had to memorize Cacciatorni concerto in 1 month, and I never even played it before. So that's what I was doing. I was just thinking colors to each different refrain, and that way, so that I know where I go from there. And so, any more tips on sonata form or Bach?
Good. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, good. So I'm so excited finally to talk to you about this last tip, and the most important one, that actually something that you might be doing while trying to memorize something, and this thing can be undermining all your effort to memorization. So basically, with me, it never occurred to me that some of my students were doing this, because I'm just very lazy. And so for me, one of the reasons is I tend to memorize things very quickly, because as a child, I was very, very lazy, and I always wanted shortcuts for everything. And so when I would start like practicing, I would practice a piece, and I thought, I was just too lazy to go get the book, open it up, and play it. So the minute I could play it from memory, I just practiced from memory, just because I was lazy. And so, because I had a good memory, it was fine. Sometimes I would accidentally memorize wrong notes, but thankfully I always had teachers who would point that out. So that didn't seem to be the problem. And so I always kind of never thought much about it. And then when I started teaching here at UTRGV, and I have really good, very gifted students, very talented students who I know are hard workers. I know sometimes you have students it's very obvious. The reason they can't remember what they're playing, because they just barely practice. And if you're a teacher, it's very obvious. You just can't hide that. But I had these wonderful students who I knew were practicing, putting the effort into practicing, memorizing, and then it was just like on stage, I could tell they were so terrified, and sometimes they did have hiccups that happened, and they lost their place and so forth. So I was just kind of like, couldn't figure out why that was happening, till it occurred to me that, and when I asked them about this, I asked this particular student, well, okay, so how do you practice on memorization? And they would tell me, well, I just practice like this, and I feel like when I memorized, I played it several times. I said, yes, but then when you go back to working on that piece that you just memorized, do you use music? And they said, yes, of course. And that was the aha moment for me. So although I do want to make a disclaimer, and of course it's very important to every so often play through the piece with the music, just to avoid any kind of, also, sometimes you might not notice dynamics. It's fun to go over like all the details in music. But if you eventually are going to perform this piece from memory, you want to practice from memory. As soon as you start remembering something, then you don't open the music. And when, like, if you're practicing Paganini concerto and there's this hard part, you practice it from memory once you memorize it. You don't go to the music and practice it with music all the time, and then all of a sudden you have to play from memory. And so for me, and I've seen, I've mentioned that to my students, I've noticed a huge improvement. I've noticed that they were much more comfortable playing in the lesson from memory, performing on stage from memory, and they told me that did make a big difference. So if you are, just remember this. And I remember it happened to me actually once, back when I was conservatory, and there was a big thing about, you should practice with music all the time because you might be missing some very important things. And guess what? That was the only time. So I remember I was playing a Bach A minor fugue, and that was the only time when I actually performed it. I was scared of forgetting things, and I realized that was because I barely practiced it from memory. And so on my personal experience as a teacher and as a performer, I want to tell you, that's something will not even add any extra time to your practicing, but make yourself comfortable playing from memory by actually using your memory while you're practicing. That is the best tip to building up confidence from playing from memory. And of course, now that we're all recording ourselves, as soon as you remember a certain part of the piece, record yourself playing from memory, then compare to how many notes you got right, how many notes you got wrong, and just do that. Recording yourself from memory, playing for your family from memory, just making playing from memory a natural thing in your everyday experience. This is the most important thing that you can do to help yourself to be confident. And and I would have to say, we're all different, and of course, if there are, of course, everybody is very different. It's very individual, and it could be that for you, it could make or break your performance. And maybe we're all very different. Maybe the way your mind works, you need to have music to perform, and that's fine. If it doesn't make you any less of the musician. But in general, like I said, as a pedagogue, I've seen that memorization requirement really adds so much to the learning process, because it's like that extra layer that you have to put, extra layer of effort, extra layer of concentration that you have to put in. It definitely, if you would like to even memorize for yourself, if you're scared, you can still use music while you're performing. But even if you know that you could play this piece from memory, if you know it very well, that you have it memorized while you're performing it, your performance level will definitely skyrocket. All right. So that's it. That was a really fun live. Thank you guys for joining us. It was a really fun topic, and I like that other topic, and we'll probably do something on that. So have a wonderful Halloween. Stay safe.
Happy
right?
Halloween.
Stay well. If you I know Edinburgh canceled all the trick or treating, but
some people are doing it, and just stay safe if you are doing any Halloween stuff. Wear your mask, social distance, and join us next week. Also, if you didn't hear me at the beginning, make sure to follow our Instagram.
Yes, please.
At Seitz String Pros, all lowercase, no spaces, on Instagram to keep up with us. And tune in next week. Let us know if you have any topic ideas. We'll definitely go over. Michael Fossum said, "Thank you, ladies, for sharing your knowledge. I really enjoy your show and making it part of my weekend routine."
Oh, thank you. Yay. Shout out to Michael Fossum.
And Isaiah said, "Thank you."
You're welcome, Isaiah. I hope that helped.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome, guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
It's really fun for us.
Really fun, yeah. It's really fun to have this time to communicate.
And just let us know if you have any topics on discussion or things that you are, curious about.
Also, one more. Speaking of Halloween, please check out, I know it's an old video that I did in 2018, but it's a beautiful piece, especially if you are an educator and if you have some students who might be later playing for solo and ensemble. It's Tartini's Sonata in G minor. It's not the Devil's Trill. It's Didone Abbandonata. And I remember in 2018, I cloned myself. So Danny and I made this video where I play both piano and violin. So I would love for you if you could give some comments on that video, and if you have students, let them hear. It's a beautiful sonata, and who knows, maybe they'll want to play it for the UIL solo ensemble.
All right. Awesome, guys.
Thank
you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
See you next weekend.